The night prior to what was to become the worst day of my life, Herb just didn't seem right. His cry sounded wrong. His eyes looked a bit odd. But as a relatively new mum, I kind of shrugged it off. Grandad was up from Norfolk visiting and him and Joe went for a curry. I perhaps checked on Herb more that evening but tried to carry on as normal. The next day was a huge day for me at work, the launch of Manchester International Festival. 18 months in the making and the whole team had a role to play in the day. I dropped Herb off early at nursery and Joe left for York. He stayed over 2 nights a week at the time. It was crisp and bright and gorgeous that day and I felt sick with anticipation. We were on our way to the venue when nursery rang for the first time. Herb had a temperature over 38.5. The policy was to call to check it was okay to give Calpol. I agreed and hoped his temperature would resolve itself, but I wasn't surprised they'd called. Half an hour later, just as I was positioned on the door, clipboard in hand, waiting to greet all the festival guests who were queuing outside, nursery called again. Herb's temperature had gone up and was now over 39 degrees. I had to go and get him. I remember being disgruntled that they couldn't handle it. Imagine. I spent the afternoon with a poorly baby on my lap, whilst I tried to keep up with the precious launch live on social media, fielding emails and checking comments. Herb's temperature went up and down all day, even reaching 40 degrees at one point. And here's the thing. The previous weekend we'd been away with my oldest friends, and a conversation had arisen about Calpol and children, and whether we should let them battle temperatures and bugs without medicine. A friend worked for the BMA and cited a new study that suggested benefits in letting the body do its thing. And so I didn't whiz Herb to hospital. I didn't even give him regular medicine. I just kind of hoped his body would fight off whatever bug was there. I remember enjoying the cuddles. Tea time came, and despite illness, Herb sat happily in his high chair and tucked into his beans on toast, and I continued obsessing at my laptop, my back to him, I think desperate to feel necessary and scared I was missing something at work. I looked up and Herb was at a wonk in his chair. His face was slumped on one side. Something kicked in then and I leapt into action. I grabbed Herb, possibly even shaking him a little, virtually threw him in the car. I can remember the lighting most particularly. It was the 17th of March around 5 p.m. Kind of dusky. Beautiful. Our nappy bag had birds on it. I would have grabbed it. His arm wasn't working. I called Joe. It was exasperation, not exactly panic. We had an excellent but huge red Volvo 240, a proper monster. Herb was behind me. I drove to Wythenshawe Hospital, only about 12 minutes from our house, but got stuck in traffic. When I looked behind me, Herb seemed glazed, so I grabbed his leg from behind and waggled it hard. I turned the radio on really loud and opened all the windows. People must have thought I was mad. When I got to A&E, Herb came to a bit. He sat on my lap, waving at an old man in reception. Must have been with his left arm. We got seen really quickly, and it was then I knew it was serious. I was the least important person there. The doctors and nurses were all talking to each other, not me. They didn't even wait to see him in a room. We were standing in the corridor as they repeatedly lifted his right arm and watched as it fell like a dead weight at his side. They told me to ring Joe and get him to come quick. They said they had to treat him for a brain infection. They didn't use the word meningitis, but that's what they meant. So teeny Herb got a line in his arm and was pumped full of super strong antibiotics just in case. I think only half an hour had passed since it happened. I called Joe. I had to leave Herb and go to the car park for reception. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for him to hear, and know it was a good 2 hours to get to us. And so we waited, except it was really only me waiting. Herb was chipper again. I remember him crawling round the floor with a few toys. He was still only using one arm. My brother texted about his daughter having her first haircut of Vidalsa soon. She's only a month older than Herb. We laughed. I didn't tell him where we were. I made plans with a friend for the weekend. I didn't tell them where we were. I just waited and hoped more than I'd ever hoped before. I also did a bit of praying, and I don't even believe in God. I felt hugely alone. It's a bit blurry after that. Joe arrived. We got taken to the children's ward. I had to go in a wheelchair with Herb, which felt fraudulent. We both remember Herb glazing over again when we got there. We were changing his nappy, but he kind of came back and then we tried to get on with bedtime. It must have been gone 10 p.m. They let us both stay with him in the ward, which is against the rules. How we got any sleep, I shall never know. I think an alarm was going off all night with another poorly baby. One mum complained loudly. I still can't get over the lack of compassion of that. We were up before 6 a.m. Herb was wibbling round his green and blue hospital cot, lopsided smiling. I called my mum and told her what had happened. My mum is ace. She's formidable and excellent. She asked me what I thought was wrong, and I looked at Herb and said, I think he's had a stroke. She didn't question it, and she didn't whiz up and get in the way. All our families checked in, but left us to handle it on our own. I think I'll forever be grateful for that. We didn't have any emotional room or energy for anyone except us. We were in hospital for a week. Herb had a lumbar puncture, a CT scan. So many people came and looked at him. He was filled full of medicine every 4 hours or so. He was so small all the cannulas kept coming out. I think he had over 10 put in all. They had to resort to his teeny feet in the end because his hands had had enough. One nurse was scary and seemed mean, but in retrospect was probably just badass and brilliant. Joe was amazing. I didn't leave Herb's side apart from the truly hard bits, the scans and punctures. I made Joe do it. My heart couldn't cope. But Joe had to go home on his own every night. Only one of us was allowed to stay. And so after 7 days of hoping someone would say, all better now and time to go home, the consultant finally confirmed an ischemic stroke, cause unknown. Some sort of vicious virus and bacteria had raged through him and randomly blipped his brain. My layman's understanding is that he could have had a febrile convulsion, fairly common in kids and with very little repercussions, but instead he had a stroke. A tiny one, a tiny blob on his brain that can never be reversed. He was 1 year and 10 days old. I think I went a bit mad afterwards. It was just so odd. It was huge and life-changing and dreadful, and then we just had to crack on. He was back at nursery after 2 weeks, and we were back at work. What were we thinking? Why did we do that? I sometimes wonder if it took longer to recover because we didn't give ourselves any time. I was a lunatic for years over temperatures. In fact, I still am. I'll never forgive myself for my preoccupation with a study on Calpol I hadn't even read on that awful day. Nowadays, I'm a regular Calpol and ibuprofen pusher, every 2 hours if my kids are even a little hot, and I'm not apologising for it. I also still get a massive rush of adrenaline if the school rings. The number flashing up on my phone is an instant trigger for panic, and I'm immediately knackered afterwards. It's such a powerful hormone. I think after about 7 years, I stopped feeling so sad when the doctors didn't say he's all okay now, because he is okay. He's been left with hemiplegia. He's wobbly on his right-hand side and wears a splint to help him walk. He's cool. He can run and jump, just maybe not as fast as everyone else, and he learned to ride a bike and play the drums this year. He still has trouble waving with his right hand, but I think he can probably live without that and be okay. And it makes us all laugh when he tries, including him. He is very, very handsome. So that is my story, but it's mainly his story, I suppose. And he survived it, and we survived it. My mother's instinct is real and immense, and I will never question it again. And it really is true that life is fragile, and we must treasure it.